handshake to all the speakers and the coordinators that are put our circle together. Respects for the drums, the relatives, the winged and the swimmers, the ones that four-legged that are on the earth. Highest of the honor, healing our nations of united resistance. The Harper put a war on our people. Everybody all together in unity. Great-grandchildren to the great-grandparents. 4 times for all our nations.
Harper's gotta go! Harper's gotta go! Harper's gotta go! Harper's gotta go!
So we need to find new ways of organizing together, because, you know, when we are together, we are strong.
And the other speakers that talked about in terms of history, you can look at our history of this country, what happens when people unite. You can look at what's happening around the world when people unite. Governments topple.
Remember Tahrir Square, remember Taksim Square. The only real response to corruption and the abuse of power is mass, sustained, and fierce resistance.
Thanks everybody for being here today. I'm here on behalf of the Vancouver District Labour Council, which probably most of you don't know what a Labour Council is. We're an umbrella organization that brings together unions from our region. So we have about 115 affiliated unions representing about 60,000 unionized men and women in the Vancouver area. I stand here today thanking Cecilia Point first and recognizing and appreciating the opportunity to be here on these unceded territories. And I also want to just take a moment. I like to do a lot of labor history, and this is a very important corner in Vancouver for all of the things that have happened here. This little building over here used to be a bank of commerce, and a group of 6 women who realized that their employer was stealing their overtime pay, making them work overtime and not paying them for it, decided to form a bank workers union that was part of a feminist-based union called Sorwalk. And they organized about 12 banks to have unionized workers as tellers, which is something that's almost unheard of today. This building over here used to be the Vancouver Province newspaper, and they had a strike in the 50s that went on for 40 weeks. 40 weeks long. And as a result of that, the Vancouver Sun actually became the prominent newspaper in this city, and the province was relegated to the 2nd most popular newspaper. But it was a situation where the employers were trying to bust the union, and those workers held strong for 40 weeks until they were able to get back, and they fought back and they won. They did not have their union busted, and they did not have their contract ripped apart. And this very point here is Victory Square now, but in 1935, this is where unemployed workers gathered. They'd been forced into relief camps in places like Slocan and many of the places you think of where Japanese internment camps were. In the 30s, that's where young unemployed members were interned. And those relief camps were called slave camps by the people who were in them. They got 30 cents a day to do manual labor. And they went on strike. They came to Vancouver in the thousands, and this was their gathering place to find out what's the next step, what are we up to, what's the news. And Mayor Jerry McGeer, who was the mayor of Vancouver at the time, literally had the Riot Act read to them. There's a plaque on that building that commemorates this action in 1935. So what did they do? They realized that their issue was a federal issue. It required a federal response. And today we're talking about our federal government and how we all need a positive change in federal response. They didn't get it either. 1,000 young men on June 3rd, 1935 climbed on top of the railway cars down here at the waterfront, and they made their way on top of that train all the way to Regina before the federal government stopped them. It was called the On to Ottawa Trek, and it resulted in the Conservative government of the day, when they went back for re-election 3 months later, that government was tossed out on their ear, and the next government actually implemented the very first forms of unemployment insurance that this country ever had. So sometimes our victories are small, but they are strong, and they make a huge difference as we accumulate. So fast forward, here we are in 2013, and what can I say about Stephen Harper? As a trade union leader, I can say that Stephen Harper hates unions. He really hates unions. Why? Because some of the things that Garth Mullins just talked about. The fact that unions are the most cohesive vehicle for worker rights and for the rights of the unemployed and other people who need some social justice in this world. We don't just look out for ourselves and the people who are covered by our collective agreements. We work very hard on things like immigrant rights and challenging temporary foreign workers so that we can have actually a real proper immigration program in this country and not slavery and exploitation of workers from other countries where we just use them and send them home again. We work on Employment Standards Acts and try to make sure that farm workers are traveling in safe vehicles and not being exposed to terrible pesticides and abuses at the workplaces. So we are, as a trade union movement, always trying to make sure that we're not going to that spiral, the race to the bottom, but the movement bringing everybody up. And that's not just because we're good people, it's because we recognize that we're vulnerable too. If everything manages to be spiraled down and if Harper is successful at destroying unions in this country, everybody will suffer. But if we are able to help lift everybody up to where our conditions are, then everybody also benefits, and so do we. Harper has been very clear about breaking into free collective bargaining. In his first 5 months as having a majority government, he invoked legislation 5 times that ordered workers back to work. And what happens there is you have a dispute. Bargaining is presumed to have some balance in it. It completely destroys the balance and gives all the power in the negotiating to the employer. They don't have to bargain with the union anymore because they can just turn to the government and say, we'll just sit back and wait for you to order these folks back to work, and then we'll be able to impose something through an arbitrator or another process. So it really distorts the power. It's an interference with free collective bargaining, the kind of bargaining that we've had since the 40s in terms of some kind of balance, in theory at least. And it's really leading to a place that's really very, very difficult for workers to be able to get justice and to support their bargaining demands. And so while only about 25% of workers in Canada are covered by federal legislation and the Federal Labour Code, provinces are following suit. So we looked at the situation last year where the BC Teachers Federation was contemplating going on a strike after back to work legislation had been passed. And what did the government do? They showed that the next thing that was going to happen was that they were going to go to court with legislation that would fine that union and its workers, its leadership, and the individual members $22 million every day. How long can you sustain against that? So we need to find new ways of organizing together. One of those is through events like this, because when we are together, we are strong. And it's really critical that the labor movement not be this is our responsibility, not to be off on our own, but to be fighting back and supporting and collaborating with all the kind of people like are here today, with First Nations, with new immigrants, temporary foreign workers, people who are looking out for the environment, and the whole range of social justice activists. None of us can do it alone, but together we are strong. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks. It's really great to be here. Just want to echo the acknowledgement that we're on unceded territory of the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, and always want to acknowledge that. It's a lot, especially when we're dealing with Canada Day. It's an important thing to remember is whose Canada this is. So I've been active for a long time fighting for social justice in a whole number of ways, and when I was asked to speak here today, I was told I could speak about anything about Harper I wanted to stop. Well, to try and narrow that down, oh my God, it was impossible. So you can look at, the reasons are almost endless why we have to stop Harper. Harper's been extraordinarily anti-democratic. There's the proroguing of Parliament, which is, he suspended Parliament because he wasn't going to be able to get his own way. It's unbelievable. There's voter suppression. The omnibus bills that he's been putting through that are attack the environment, Indigenous rights, include things like the the crime and punishment bills. It's extraordinary. There's the scandals. Now, the scandals in themselves are one thing, but I don't think he even cares. The reality is this is an anti-government government. The more they can disillusion people in government, the better. They don't want us voting. They don't want us believing that government can actually work for people if it's an actually democratic government with a party in power that cares and is democratic and listens to the people. They undermine public confidence and decrease voter turnout. They're pro-war, pro-military. The military spending in Canada is way higher than ever before. It's an incredible waste of money. If you look at what could be spent in this country if we weren't spending money on war, if we were spending money on housing, on education, on the environment, the list is endless, on health. Instead, we're spending money on war, on machines that kill people, and surveillance of people that are organizing. That's what money is being spent on. There's tax cuts to the wealthiest people in our country. There's a tax on people, anybody that's trying to organize, Indigenous people, immigrants, queer people, women, labor, environmentalists, scientists. There's constant attempts to divide us, to silence anyone who's critical of this government. So why stop Harper? He's reactionary. He's one of the most pro-corporate interest prime ministers this country has ever seen. And in the most reactionary elements of our corporate sector, the mining industry, the oil and gas industry, the banking industry, those are the forces that are behind Harper. Those are the forces that are trying to push through pipelines, ignoring the rights of Indigenous people. It's all one thing. And this is all happening amidst a whole global situation where we've had 6 years of a global economic crisis. There's governments attacking people's rights right across the country, but people are standing up. Look at what's happening today in Brazil, in Egypt, in Greece, right across the world. People are fighting back. So, we can't just sit and wait till the next election. I think that's one thing, if anybody didn't learn anything from the BC election, it was that we can't just sit on our hands and wait to elect another government. We have to be organizing now. We need to be uniting on issues that we have in common, things that we can agree on. There's differences, we have differences, we can celebrate those differences and work around them, but there are things we can all agree on. We can all agree on the need for truly affordable housing, not the vision version of affordable housing, but real affordable housing. We can unite around Indigenous rights. We can unite around the environment. We can unite around tax reform. We can unite around electoral change. We can unite around the environment. The list goes on, and this is an urgent thing. We need to be doing it now, and I think we can. The reality is that when we are united, we are so strong. And the other speakers that talked about in terms of history, you can look at our history of this country, what happens when people unite. You can look at what's happening around the world when people unite. Governments topple. You can truly make a change if we work together. So the question is, can we stop Harper?
Yeah!
Can we stop Harper?
Yeah!
Will we stop Harper? Thanks.
Asked to talk here right now, people ask me, what can a 16-year-old do? And my answer is everything. We can stop Harper, we can stop this government, and we can change Canada. Well, I would like to give big thanks to Rachel and Matthew for organizing this phenomenal event, and thank you to the people of the Coast Salish Nation for this land that we stand on. Before I begin, I would like to give my words of encouragement to the First Nations people and participants of I Don't Know More. They have been extremely courageous to fight against Harper government's destructive environmental policies and the FIPPA trade agreement. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're sitting here today, it means you want answers. Some of you might want answers to how can we stop the Northern Gateway pipeline being built here at BC. Others might want to hear about how can we stop the current government from censoring its own employees. But all of us have come together today to find an answer to one single question. How can we find a government that truly represents our long-term interest? My answer is quite simple. We can't. Under the current voting system, we will continue to elect an abusive majority government with less than 38% of the vote. The government will still claim that it represents the majority of the Canadians' interest, while in reality, more than 7 million votes has been discounted during the last federal election. How can this happen? Well, thanks to a voting system called first past the post, where one voter may only get one vote for one candidate, bad majority government and wasted votes became a lot more common. The other huge problem with our voting system is that it produces a set number of member parliaments that collectively are far more homogeneous than the entire Canadian society as a whole. Our parliament is more notably known as male, pale, and stale than our society. Well, the lack of diversity, whether of age, ethnic interest, gender, or social cultural affiliations, makes our government myopic and unable to think in our best interest. But there is a way to get out of this terrible politics. There is a way to get Mr. Harper out. The solution is called proportional representation.
Yeah!
Proportional representation refers to any voting system that produces a parliament where MPs are elected in close proportion to the votes they receive. In PR systems, regions are represented by teams of MPs with different political views in close proportion to the views held in population. In effect, each candidate who received more than 50,000 votes could get elected. PR would have a huge impact on all of the problems I've discussed above. It will make a parliament more closely associated with the voters. It will eliminate regional hypo-concentrations. It will largely do away with swing and safe ridings. By ensuring voters everywhere can get influence who gets elected, we will get a voice in parliament. We will get represented. Furthermore, the most important aspect of PR is that it would dramatically improve Indigenous representation, either by simply making it possible for First Nations people in various parts of the country to band together and to concentrate their votes on representatives they want to elect, rather than diffusing them ineffectively across the country. Or we can follow the New Zealand model and create Aboriginal voting districts in parallel to general electoral districts. Inside all of us, there is a Canadian dream. A dream for Canada to be more democratic, the House of Commons more responsive to our needs, and the government more accountable. And so here I urge you, for all of Canada and for your Canadian dream, endorse proportional representation. Thank you.
Fun fact number 2. Boing! Every time Stephen Harper masturbates, the Taliban shoot a kitten full of heroin. That's an insight.